Well, this stuff here, which I'm demonstrating my talk with, tea, is a wonder plant. They've only recently done the DNA of sequencing of tea, and they've discovered that it was known to have about 500 chemicals in it, of which only half or so they knew what they were there for. But when they did the DNA sequencing, which was appropriately done in Yunnan in China about 5 years ago, they found that its genome is twice as long as any other plant, potatoes, tomatoes, etc., etc. It's a very convoluted, very ancient, and very rich genomic structure. And one of its main features is that it has a curious feature which some genomes have, which is, can't remember the technical term, but it basically means a replication of chunks. One of the reasons it's very long is that you have this sequence here, and then it's replicated down here, and it's replicated down here. And geneticists think one reason for this may be that if the genome is attacked and destroyed at a certain point by some outside force, it has a copy, and that makes it extra strong. And in the case of tea, this explains why tea is amazingly effective against viruses and bacteria. You can take tea from its native area, which of course is in the Golden Triangle around sort of Burma, southern, southwestern China, Assam, that area, the thick, hot, wet forests where it survived against huge competition in a great Darwinian struggle. You can take it from its homeland and you can plant it in Kenya, you can plant it in South America, you can plant it in anywhere more or less, probably you can in England. And there's a whole set of new viruses and bacteria and things going to predate on it, but it survives. It doesn't get killed off. When coffee was killed off in the Nilgiri Hills in the later 19th century, where my great-grandfather was, they replaced it with tea, because tea fights off bacteria and viruses in an amazing way. For example, the worst virus that attacks plants is called mosaic virus, and it attacks, it's like a mosaic, it attacks potatoes, the potato famine and so on. It doesn't affect tea. So what I discovered was that tea, and I discovered this all because I know nothing about molecular biology or biology, through reading the Encyclopedia Britannica, and then going and talking to, again, this is a wonderful thing about King's College and Cambridge. I went and talked to geneticists and molecular biologists in King's, and they said, Alan, of course, didn't you know that tea contains all this anti-bacterial substance? It's called phenolics. The main substance in tea is phenolics, and phenolics is the most powerful antibacterial agent known to human beings. It's what Lister used when he cleaned up the British hospitals in the 19th century. That was phenolics, and tea contains that. There are PhDs done by people in Trinity College, Cambridge, on the effect of phenolics and so on. We'll take you to our lab, which I went to, and he said, this is what phenolics are. So basically, tea contains this amazing phenolics to fight off, because the surface of tea, and you can often see this, if you have a shiny plant, a plant with shiny leaves, like a bay leaf or tea leaf, that shininess is often a sign that the covering is a protective layer to stop predators, basically, particularly very small ones like bacteria, from destroying the plant. So tea in its covering had these very powerful set of antibacterial agents which kill back any kind of bacteria. And to give you a very graphic example, when I started to work on it with my mother and went into this in detail, I found that an American surgeon called McNaughton in the later 19th century had been asked by the American Army to devise food and drink for the American Army. So new microscopes, and this is glass intersecting, had just come on. So he decided, let's see what tea is. And so he'd done what Pasteur had done with beer, because it was the same thing. Pasteur had discovered the origin of bacteria, or the nature of bacteria, by doing experiments on why beer doesn't go off. And he'd done his tests. Well, Macnaghten did the same thing. He got 3 glasses and he boiled water. So that would kill off bacteria if you boil for a long time. And he'd got actually 6 glasses. He got 3 glasses with boiled water, and he put cholera, dysentery, typhoid, the 3 great water killers in the 3 glasses with just water. And he got 3 other glasses, and he got cold tea, put that, and he dropped the dysentery and co into it, left it for 24 hours and put it under a microscope. In the glasses with water, there were millions. It would kill you just like that. In the glasses with tea, they were all dead. So basically, when you drink a cup of tea, you're drinking the most powerful medicine in the world. And it, as I discovered again through King's, talking to the secretary of the Royal Society, who was Anne Macfarlane, who was explained, I said, I can't see how it's protecting infants, because the infant mortality rate dropped at the same time. The Cambridge group were just showing that it was mortality, and the infants stopped dying in the same way as their parents. And I said, how is this? She said, well, don't you know that when a mother drinks tea, it goes into the milk. The phenolics will be passed on to the child. So people were drinking this substance and surviving. And that's how this enormous burst. Later, I looked at other things, and I have theories that there's a lot of work to show that it is also, tea is very effective against all sorts of other dangers of various kinds, strokes and heart disease and cancers of various kinds and so on. It's really a miracle substance. I think the last clue, and this just shows a feature of my work, which is that in order to solve sort of largish problems, you have to have scattered interests. Because being interested in Japan, I'd come across, when I was looking at the history of medieval Japan, I come across a 2-volume work by a Buddhist monk. He'd been to China. He was called Isai. And in the 12th or 13th century, he'd come back and he'd brought in green powdered tea to Japan. Again, they'd had tea before, and the emperor was very ill with stomach illness, and he was summoned, and he gave him tea, and he was cured. And the emperor said, this is magical. And he said, we must all drink tea. And Isai wrote a 2-volume work called Treatise on the Healthful Properties of Tea. And he said, I don't know what it is, but there's something in tea which is bitter, and it seems to clean out your stomach and reduce. So when you look at Japan, for example, it went through what we went through in the 18th century, in the 13th, 14th century, because many diseases in Japan, particularly waterborne diseases, disappeared in Japan. You had these great cities, the biggest cities in the world in the 17th century were in Japan, with no public sewage system and so on and so on. And yet they didn't have serious waterborne diseases. Dysentery, typhoid, cholera came later, but basically they solved the problem of waterborne disease. And that solution was one of the reasons we are here now, because if you look at the problem that Malthus pointed out, which is that as populations rise, the way to progress is to gather them together in dense settlements called cities. So you get big urban growth like Rome or Istanbul or whatever. When you get people coming together like that, the mortality rate very quickly rises fast because the water gets very polluted. So again and again, a civilization like Spain, Italy, France had risen, and then it had hit this threshold and the city never got beyond that side. London was the first city that broke through into mega millions. And it was able to do that because of tea. I mean, tea is not the cause of the Industrial Revolution, but without it, you and I wouldn't be talking now.